The Armed Forces Honor Guard and United States Army Band are formed and waiting as the Vice President moves to the Tomb of the Unknown to place the wreath. The wreath is being placed by Vice President Pence. The Vice President is observing a moment of silence. The wreath ceremony is complete. The Veterans Day program will begin in 10 minutes. Please move to your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Major General Michael L. Howard, Commanding General, United States Army, Military District of Washington. Ms. Cara Durham Aguilera, Executive Director, Army National Military Cemeteries. Mr. Thomas Stevens, Korean War Veterans Association, United States of America. And the Honorable David J. Shulkin, Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, Please remain standing for the procession of our nation's colors and those of our veteran service organizations. As we march on the colors, the United States Air Force Band will play the National Emblem March. Please place your hand over your heart or render a hand salute. Please remain standing for the prayer for all veterans, delivered by Chaplain Michael McCoy Sr., Director, Chaplain Service, National Chaplain Center.
Let us pray. Eternal God of nations and veterans, you are so awesome in so many ways. We invite your presence in this most sacred garden, where many of our veterans and families have gathered and many of our nation's heroes rest. We give you thanks on this Veterans Day for the courage, devotion, and sacrifice of all those who have worn our nation's uniforms and offered military service for this country, that we could enjoy such freedoms. God, we ask that you bless our nation's veterans, encourage and bring healing to those who are suffering from both visible and invisible wounds of war. God, hold safely in your hands all military members, veterans, their families, and all who live in this great nation. God, remove evil acts from our midst and grant us peace at home and abroad. Give to us grateful hearts and a united will to honor our veterans. May we always hold them in our love and our prayers until your world is perfected in peace and all wars cease. God, give us all a joyous spirit as we honor our nation's veterans. Let your presence be evident in this celebration of their service. In the name of God, who challenged us to care, amen.
Now, I'd like to invite Mr. Thomas Stevens, National President, Korean War Veterans Association, to lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. It is now my distinct privilege to introduce the members of the Veterans Day National Committee. The committee was formed by presidential order in 1954 to plan this annual observance in honor of America's veterans and to support Veterans Day observances throughout the nation. Please hold your applause until I've introduced these special guests. If you're able, please stand when your name is called. Thomas Stevens, National President, Korean War Veterans Association. Angel Zuniga, National Commander, American GI Forum. Frank Kowalski, National Commander, Catholic War Veterans of the USA. Joe Parker, National President, Blinded Veterans Association. John Rowan, President, Vietnam Veterans of America. Keith Harmon, Commander-in-Chief, Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States. William Starkey, National President, Fleet Reserve Association. David Zerflew, National President, Paralyzed Veterans of America. Marion Polk, National Commander, American Veterans, AMVETS. Raoul Helwig, National Commander, Army and Navy Union. John Ostrowski, Executive Director, Non-Commissioned Officers Association. Larry Marcoulier, National Commander, the American Legion. Cornelius Van Ness, National Commander, Military Order of the Purple Heart. Wendell Webb, National Commandant, Marine Corps League. Lyman Smith, Executive Director, Military Chaplains Association. Jerry Walden, National Commander, Legion of Valor of the USA. David Gibson, Commander-in-Chief, Military Order of the World Wars. John Adams, National President, the Retired Enlisted Association. Brian Thacker, Washington, D.C. agent, Congressional Medal of Honor Society of the USA. Gary Augustine, Executive Director, Disabled American Veterans. Dana Atkins, President, Military Officers Association of America. Jeff Ledoux, President, Air Force Sergeants Association. Dean Coppola, Board Chair, Commissioned Officers Association of the United States Public Health Service. Mr. Robert Swan, National Commander, Polish Legion of American Veterans, USA. Not with us today is Paul Warner, National Commander from the Jewish War Veterans, as they do not attend the cemetery on the Shabbat. They will celebrate Veterans Day at the Vietnam Wall and World War II Memorial. The associate members of the committee are located in the boxes to my left. I'd like to ask the presidents and national commanders that comprise our associate membership to stand and be recognized. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing our Veterans National Leadership with your applause. It is now my pleasure to introduce our Veterans Service Organization host for 2017, the Korean War Veterans Association of the USA. The Korean War Veterans Association of the United States of America, or KWVA, is honored to serve as the host organization for the 2017 Veterans Day National Commemoration at Arlington National Cemetery. KWVA is incorporated as a nonprofit corporation that meets the requirements for a veteran service organization under Section 501c19 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, and that is organized under the laws of the state of New York. The KWVA mission is to defend the nation, care for veterans, perpetuate their legacy, remember all missing and fallen, maintain their memorial, and support a free Korea. If you have ever honorably served in Korea as a member of the U.S. Armed Forces from September 3rd, 1945 to the present, or served outside of Korea June 25th, 1950 to January 31st, 1955, you qualify for membership. The Korean War Veterans Association is represented today by their national president. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Thomas Stevens.
Thank you. Vice President Pence, Secretary Shulkin, distinguished guests, and my fellow veterans and their families, good morning and happy Veterans Day. My name is Tom Stevens. I'm the National President of the Korean War Veterans Association of the United States of America. The Korean War Veterans Association has the distinct honor and privilege of co-hosting this year's National Veterans Day commemorations here in Washington, D.C. Often referred to as the Forgotten War, the Korean War began on June 25th, 1950, when some 75,000 soldiers from the North Korean People's Army poured across the 38th parallel, the boundary between the Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the north and the pro-Western Republic of Korea to the south. The Korean Peninsula is still divided today. Today, I would like to pay special tribute to all who have served on the Korean Peninsula from the start of the war to the present. Your service and dedication to ensure the stability and freedom of the Republic of Korea will be remembered for years to come. We honor and thank you for your service to our country and to the Republic of Korea. On this Veterans Day and all such days, when we pause to remember, there are essential lessons for the young and indeed for all the rest of us as well. appreciate the blessings of freedom, recognize the power and virtue of sacrifice, and respect those who gave everything on behalf of the common good. Veterans Day reminds us of what we can achieve when we pull together as one nation, respecting each other with all of our myriad differences, but coming together. We can fight any battle and face any challenge. May God bless the United States of America and all the American heroes we honor today, and may God bless also those who still stand at the ready, and may He give us the wisdom to do what is right for tomorrow. Thank you. We're honored to be the host veteran service organizations. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable David J. Shulkin, Secretary of Veterans Affairs.
Thank you. It's great to see all of you on this wonderful Veterans Day. Mr. Vice President, Mrs. Pence, Medal of Honor recipient Brian Thacker, Secretary Mnuchin, Secretary Mattis, Secretary Zinke, Acting Secretary Hagan, Deputy Secretary Bowman, Deputy Secretary Shanahan, Secretary Wilson, General Dunford, General Selva, former VA Secretary Jim Peake, Tom Stevens from the Korean War Veterans Association, and all of the representatives of our veteran service organizations, assembled veterans, members of our armed forces, VA colleagues, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think I left anybody out. The Department of Veteran Affairs has two main missions: to honor the dead and care for the living, in accordance with the solemn promise made by President Abraham Lincoln in his second inaugural address in 1865. We at VA keep that promise 365 days a year. And this past year, we've made great progress towards also keeping President Trump's promise to veterans, strengthening our ability to provide timely, high-quality care and benefits, while also improving outcomes and experience for veterans. But twice a year, we invite the nation to join us in keeping Lincoln's promise by honoring the dead on Memorial Day and honoring the living on Veterans Day. There was a time when more Americans understood the importance of honoring the living. Many more Americans had connections with the military. In the 1950s, nearly half of all Americans, 45%, had either served in the military or had an immediate family member who had served in the military. Today, that number is just 16%. So I've invited one veteran from each of our recent major conflicts to be here today to remind us why we honor veterans. First, to my left in box 40 is Jessica Halton of Kalamazoo, Michigan. Jessica, would you stand? Great. Jess ran out of money for college, so she enlisted in the Navy in 2010. Trained as an aircraft mechanic, she served with an E-2C Hawkeye Squadron at Atsugi, Japan, completing 3 6-month cruises with the squadron aboard the USS George Washington. Then, after 4 years on active duty, she used the GI Bill to finish her bachelor's degree and earn a master's degree in national security policy, which she will finish in May. Congratulations, Jess, and thank you for your service. Next, in box 40, Jeff Roper. Jeff, would you stand? Jeff was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina, raised in Richmond, Virginia. Jeff was a sergeant in the Gulf War with the 2nd of the 327th Infantry, 101st Airborne Division. He was encamped with his squad in Saudi Arabia when an anti-tank round went through the camp. The round struck the tent next to Jeff's and exploded, peppering Jeff's back with shrapnel. Thankfully, Jeff was not seriously injured and was able to remain with his unit. He retired from the Army in 2006 with 20 years of service, and now he works in my office at the Department of Veteran Affairs. He's here today representing both Gulf War veterans and VA employees, 1/3 of whom are veterans. Thank you, Jeff. Next, down here in front is Tom Devlin from Newtown, Pennsylvania. Tom, where are you? Okay. Tom enlisted in the Marines in 1966. 2 years later, he was a rifleman in Vietnam when a booby trap sent him flying through the air. He spent the 1968 Tet Offensive in the hospital in Da Nang. After Vietnam, Tom served 9 years in the Marine Corps Reserves before switching services and joining the Air National Guard as a medic. He's retired now after 27 years of active service. Tom credits the Vet Center in Silver Spring, Maryland with saving his life. He showed up there one day at his wit's end thinking of suicide, but the Vet Center staff brought him back from the brink. Tom, to you and all other Vietnam veterans, welcome home. Next, in box 40 in the back, is Bill Scott of Marlow, Oklahoma. Bill, would you stand? Okay, coming up there. Great. True to his roots, as a proud member of the Chickasaw Nation, Bill fudged his birth date to enlist in the National Guard when he was just 16. When the Korean War broke out, he could have used his young age to get out of going, but he didn't. He deployed to Korea with the 45th Infantry Division in 1951. Despite his age, Bill was made a squad leader and was promoted to staff sergeant. He served 9 months in combat before returning home and going back to high school for his senior year. Then he used the GI Bill to go to college, and he's had a very good life ever since. He's been a patient at VA facilities in 2 states. He's bought 2 houses using VA home loans, and he lives in one of them now with Linda, his wife of 52 years. Congratulations to both of you. Finally, also in box 40, is Carmel Wetzel, who grew up on a farm in West Virginia. Carmel, nice to see you. Carmel was drafted in 1942 and deployed to France with the 26th Infantry Division 1 month after D-Day. First, he drove a truck for the famed Red Ball Express, an endless convoy that moved food, fuel, and ammunition from the English Channel to Patton's Third Army. Later, he saw combat with a heavy weapons company until November 1st, 1944, when amid fierce fighting, he was captured by the Germans. He spent the rest of the war as a POW, mostly at Stalag 2A, north of Berlin. Breakfast was a cup of tea, lunch was 2 rutabagas, dinner was 1/6 of a loaf of bread. Carmel escaped once with 2 other men by sneaking out the front door of the barracks during a nighttime bed check. They remained at large for 15 days before they were recaptured, and were only not shot because several Americans who had escaped just before them had been shot. After the war, Carmel went back to driving a truck, but for 2 years in his spare time and without any pay, he built apartments in Baltimore for other veterans returning home from the war. Amazing stories, and there's hardly a veteran alive who doesn't have one. Our guest speaker today also has a story to tell, not of his own service, but of his family's. The Vice President's father, Second Lieutenant Edward J. Pence, also served in the 45th Infantry Division in Korea, not long after Bill Scott, our teenage Chickasaw sergeant. In the war's last months, Ed Pence was awarded the Bronze Star for his actions as a rifle platoon leader in combat near Pork Chop Hill. That's not all. In 1983, the Vice President's older brother, First Lieutenant Greg Pence, also served with the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment in Beirut, Lebanon, just before the infamous barrack bombings that killed 241 American service members and 58 French paratroopers. And now, currently serving, is the Vice President's son, Marine First Lieutenant Michael Pence, who's now in flight school flying jet trainers. That's quite a service record for one family, and what it tells me is that when it comes to caring for the men and women who have served our country, the Vice President is a man we know will always do the right thing. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great personal pleasure and professional honor to present to you the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence.
Thank you, Secretary Shulkin. Secretary Mattis, Secretary Zinke, all the members of the Cabinet, Secretary Wilson, General Dunford, General Selva, General McConville, Admiral Caldwell, and Admiral Michael. To Director Durham Aguilera, to distinguished members of Congress, and all our honored guests, but most of all, to the men and women of the armed forces of the United States of America, and to all our veterans who have worn the uniform of this great nation, happy Veterans Day. There is a day in the spring when we remember those who served and did not come home. But today, Veterans Day, is the day when all across America, in gatherings large and small, we pause to remember those who served and did come home. For nearly a century since the guns of the First World War fell silent, on the 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month, the American people have observed this day, first as Armistice Day and now as Veterans Day. And I thank you all who are here and all that are gathered around this nation for continuing this great tradition. And to our heroes near and far, I bring Veterans Day greetings from a great champion for the men and women who've worn the uniform of our armed forces, the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. At this very moment, our president is halfway around the world. But I know his heart is here, in this hallowed place, and at every Veterans Day service across the country. President Trump asks us to be here at this National Veterans Day ceremony to, in his words, honor all Americans who served in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard in times of war and peace, and to pay due respect to those Americans who have passed the torch of liberty from one generation to the next, for they surely have. And so I say to each and every one of you veterans gathered here, and all of those that might be looking on, we're grateful for your service. We're grateful for your sacrifice. And I'll make you a promise. Just as you fought for us, we will always fight for you. The Bible tells us if you owe debts, pay debts. If honor, then honor. If respect, then respect. And the debt our nation owes those who've worn the uniform is a debt we will never be able to fully repay. From the hour of our nation's birth, our best and bravest have stepped forward to defend our freedom. The unbroken cord of their service stretches back into the mists of American history. From Bunker Hill to Belleau Wood, from San Juan Hill to Saipan, from the Coral Reef to Kandahar. Nearly 50 million men and women have donned the uniform of the United States. And nearly 20 million still walk among us today. And as we speak, a new generation of American veterans is being forged across the wider world. As I look out today, it's a humbling sight. I see heroes from the Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, and more recently from Iraq and Afghanistan, and many more who've watched in times of peace.
Yesterday in Da Nang, Vietnam, our president commemorated the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War and met with some of the heroes who fought that war on the very soil where they fought. As the president said yesterday, we salute our brave Vietnam veterans and recall the sacrifices they made for our freedom and for our nation's strength. Some 9 million Americans served in those jungles, and more than 58,000 fell in defense of freedom. Their names now enshrined on a black granite wall not far from here. So to all our Vietnam veterans who are gathered here in the midst of this 50th anniversary, I say thank you and welcome home. You know, I'm told one of those veterans has come to this ceremony almost every year and is almost always introduced, as he was today. But I don't think his story has ever been told. And I hope he won't mind too much if I tell it today. 36 years ago this March, a first lieutenant in the United States Army, 1st Battalion, 97 Artillery, awoke at dawn to a massive North Vietnamese attack on a hilltop outpost. He and his brothers were heavily outnumbered. It took just minutes for the enemy to break through their defenses, and the fighting very quickly became hand-to-hand. History records in that moment that young first lieutenant rallied his brothers to stand their ground. He ordered air and artillery strikes from a dangerously exposed position for 4 straight hours. As the situation worsened, he personally directed the withdrawal and provided cover fire, and to ensure his brother's safety and to inflict maximum damage on the enemy, he actually called in an artillery strike on his own position. Wounded and unable to escape himself, he managed to evade detection for 8 long days until he was rescued when American forces retook the outpost. For his conspicuous gallantry, at the risk of his own life, above and beyond the call of duty, he received, of course, the Medal of Honor. So would you join me today in thanking a true American hero, Medal of Honor recipient, 1st Lieutenant Brian Thacker. Our nation owes a debt to our veterans, and as I said, it's a debt we can never fully repay. But on this Veterans Day, we rededicate ourselves to accomplishing just that. And I can assure you, since the outset of this administration, President Trump has fought tirelessly to fulfill the words of our nation's 16th president, to care for him who shall have borne the battle. Working with Secretary Shulkin, we've made the Department of Veterans Affairs already more efficient, effective, and accountable. Let me be clear. Veterans' benefits are not entitlements. They are earned. They are the ongoing compensation for services rendered in the uniform of the United States of America. And under President Donald Trump, we're keeping the promises that we've made, the men and women who've served in our armed forces. This president has already expanded the Veterans Choice Program by more than $2 billion to give our heroes access to real-time, high-quality health care. And because not all wounds of war are visible, we've improved veterans' access to urgent mental health care services and given greater access to telemedicine for our veterans. President Trump has signed the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act to ensure that our veterans receive the highest level of service, and this president has taken decisive action to end a pattern of neglect and mistreatment at the VA. We've already fired or suspended over 1,500 VA employees for negligent behavior. And I want to assure you, as the President has said, we will not rest or relent until all America's great veterans receive the care they so richly deserve. Beyond health care, President Trump has also signed legislation to expand the post-9/11 GI Bill and eliminate the 15-year limit on benefits for new veterans so they can pursue an education of their choosing. And I'm glad to report veteran unemployment has already fallen by nearly 40% since President Trump was elected. It's lower today than any point since the year 2000, and we're just getting started. You know, today our veterans continue to serve our nation in careers ranging from business to education, from law enforcement to public service. And it seems wherever they go, their lives are characterized by that same sense of duty and the courage and selflessness forged during their years in our armed forces. You know, earlier this week, I heard the remarkable story of one such veteran, and I thought I'd share it with you today. On Wednesday, Karen and I traveled to Sutherland Springs, Texas, to meet the families and the victims of the worst attack on a place of worship in American history. At Brooke Army Medical Center, we stood at the bedside of a retired U.S. Marine Corps gunnery sergeant named Juan Macias. We spoke to his family as he lay before us, recovering from his injuries. But it was from another member of the church that we learned of that veteran's extraordinary courage last Sunday. Julie Workman, a registered nurse, was also wounded at the First Baptist Church that day. But no sooner had the attacker left than she began to treat the wounded. Seeing what lay before her, though, Julie told me she was momentarily overcome. And that's when Gunny stepped in. Despite having 5 bullet wounds, she told me that Gunny sat up, looked her in the eye, and said, "You were born for this. Keep your wits about you. Do your job." She said that's all she needed to hear. Heroism outlives the uniform, and her actions and his courage undoubtedly saved lives that day. That's an American veteran. On this Veterans Day, we honor those who served with tributes and promises kept. But as our veterans understand better than most, we also honor their service by ensuring that the men and women served in our armed forces today have the resources and support they need to defend this nation in this day. Our veterans will be glad to know that President Trump has already taken decisive action to make the strongest military in the history of the world stronger still. This president has already signed the largest increase in military spending in nearly a decade, and before this year is out, we'll enact the largest investment in our national defense since the days of Ronald Reagan. And under President Donald Trump, I'll make you a promise. We're going to rebuild our military. We're going to restore the arsenal of democracy, and we will once again give our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen the resources and training they need to accomplish their mission and come home safe. That's our promise to all of you. As I close, let me say again how deeply humbling it is for me to stand before so many heroes. For you see, I'm, as Secretary Shulkin told you, I'm the son of a soldier, And I'm the proud father of a United States Marine, but my life never took me into the uniform of the United States. I've never experienced the cost of war on the battlefield, or had to endure the hardship of time away from home and family that can come with service, even in peacetime. But I've seen enough to know the burden our veterans bear is oftentimes a burden that lives far beyond your time in uniform. 64 years ago, my dad served in combat in Korea. Second Lieutenant Edward J. Pence was in the U.S. Army, 45th Infantry. He fought in the Battle of Old Baldy and Pork Chop Hill, and he earned a Bronze Star for his courage under fire. The truth is, I learned most of that after I grew up, because Dad never talked about the war, and that medal stayed in his dresser drawer. A few years after he died, I was visiting a cousin that he grew up with on the streets of Chicago. And he told me that the war had changed my dad. When I asked him how, he said, "You know, before the war, your dad was the most happy-go-lucky guy I ever met. But," he said, "after he came back, he was different." And then he said words I'll never forget. He said, and I quote, "I don't think your dad ever got over the guilt of coming home." I don't think your dad ever got over the guilt of coming home. You know, in those words, in an instant, I understood every unfinished sentence, every faraway look on my father's face whenever the war came up. If he talked about it at all, he talked about the guys he served with. Guys who didn't get to come home to marry their sweetheart, raise a house full of kids, live their dreams, and see their children's children. That's when I understood the quiet cost of freedom and the burden so many of our veterans bear in their hearts. So to all our veterans looking on, know this: we are with you. You do not carry that burden alone. As a nation, we stand ready to help you shoulder that load with the compassion, support, and prayers of the American people. You were there for us. Now we are here for you. President Trump said this morning, in his words, "America's veterans are this country's greatest national treasure." He said, "You're the best role models for our youngest citizens, a constant reminder of all that's good, decent, and brave." And to you I say, no truer words were spoken. This is the land of the free because it's still the home of the brave, and you, our veterans, are our brave. You stepped forward. You counted our lives more important than yours. And we thank God, who, as the psalmist says, trained your hands for war, gave you the strength to advance against a troop, but also brought you home safe to your loved ones in a grateful nation. In his proclamation for this Veterans Day, President Trump called upon every American to recognize the fortitude and sacrifice of our veterans. But let me add one challenge. especially to my fellow countrymen who did not serve in the armed forces of the United States. Before this day is out, at home or at work, on a street corner or over a backyard fence, whether they came home in the last week or in the last century, find a veteran, extend your hand, and say those words they never asked to hear but deserve to hear every day. To my fellow Americans, I say, find a veteran today and say, thank you for your service. Thank them for their courage. Thank them for your freedom. And thank them for doing their part to preserve this last best hope of earth for ourselves and our posterity. To our veterans, on behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation, I say, thank you for your service. May God bless you and your families. May God bless all those who this day wear the uniform and stand ready. And may God continue to bless the United States of America.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and join the United States Air Force Band in singing God Bless America. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing as we retire the colors. Retire the colors! This concludes the 2017 National Veterans Day Observance. Please be seated for the departure of the Vice President of the United States and the official party. Thank you for joining us today as we celebrate and honor all who served.
Yeah, it goes dead silent. Like, there's a way through it. Well, the problem was that they texted me, and we were making announcements. You know, he finished the announcements on the other side, and it went dead. Well, by then, everything's shifting over. And then I looked at my phone afterwards and went, uh-oh. Well, Sergeant Miller, I guess we got in touch with you?
Yeah, I've been talking. They got him locked.
Yeah, no, I know. I just